Interestingly, as we get older and as people move towards the end of their life, one of the most consistent things that show up is how often people regret the things they didn't do and not the things they did. Failure is not permanent, quitting is. We live in a day and age where it has never been easier to succeed. I would also say it's never been harder to earn a living wage, because a living wage isn't enough anymore. So 30, 40 years ago, you could probably make ends meet with a minimum wage job or something where the average pay got you a house, got you a car, and you could probably live. That's getting harder and harder to do, especially with inflation over the last 4 years. However, if you develop high-value skill sets, it's never been easier to acquire real wealth. There is an insane amount of money floating around in the world. You simply need to attract it with high-value skill sets. And the good news is, it's never been easier to be able to access the information necessary to develop a high-value skill set. For somebody in their 20s, they don't even remember a time without the internet. They don't remember a time where it was insanely hard to go find the skill sets or the information to build the skill sets necessary to be proficient at something. You literally probably had to go to the library, look it up in an encyclopedia, find an entrepreneur or a mentor that was willing to train you and maybe do it for free. It's a different world. Now you can go on YouTube and find literally the best at about anything and get the information necessary to succeed. So to that end, I don't think we have any excuses. When we're in our 20s and early 20s, depending on how you grew up, but statistically, you are more likely to have a lot more time and energy than you do money. Treat time and energy like money. Treat it like a resource, because that's exactly what it is. Don't squander your time and energy on things that don't have a compounding effect or that do not invest and grow over time. Treat time and energy like it's money, and I promise you will end up with a lot more money in the end. And then get around people who have the information you need and offer them value and service. I'm always shocked how many times I hear people think it's crazy to work for free for somebody. Now, if working for free meant you're working a dead-end job or doing something that you're not learning and growing and have zero opportunity, I would agree. Unless you're just being altruistic and you want to add value to somebody's business, life, or nonprofit, I wouldn't work for free in that condition. But if I'm getting to show up around somebody who has a skill set I want, and what I'm getting is an education, I would not be frustrated to not be getting paid to learn, assuming I'm getting access to information that's going to help me develop a high-value skill set. And unfortunately, that isn't a message we're hearing a lot. People think if I show up, I should be paid to grace you with my presence. And if that's your sentiment and how you show up, you're going to have a hard time finding people who are going to be willing to help you. You want to get around people who have the information you need and do what it takes to get it from them. And that may be being in service of them, and they're being in service of you by teaching you the skill sets and the information necessary to succeed. But where there's a will, there's a way. Find a way to add value to people, and they will find a way to add value back. And get clear about the things and the skill sets you need to learn and go develop them. But at the end of the day, I said this a few times in these Q&As, you have to take action. I'd rather you have a good plan with excellent execution than have a phenomenal plan that you do not have the ability to execute. Just get started. And I find when people do that, the universe meets them where they're at, and they will grow and learn through it. Those iterations, if you learn from your mistakes, those iterations will get you closer and closer to your goals with every one.
Best advice for young adults who are trying to start a business.
Young adult trying to start a business. I love this. We are a country built on entrepreneurship. I'm a huge fan of entrepreneurship for so many reasons. If I was young and just getting started, I would go try to partner with somebody who already runs a successful business. Before I ever started my own, I'd go learn from people who are doing it. Get paid in the form of education by learning from other people's success and failures. You will save yourself a lot of time, money, and heartache by learning from other people. So that's where I would start. Find somebody who's in a similar business, who is successful, and figure out how you can add value for them or work for them while you learn the skill sets necessary to be a successful entrepreneur. Also, obviously, we have more access to information than any other time in history. I would be getting on YouTube and finding the best of the best at business and entrepreneurship. People who have demonstrated competency and getting advice from them. And although you may not be able to talk to them personally, you can sure get a ton of advice by simply watching their content and absorbing what they're saying and then testing it for yourself to see how it works. Hopefully that helps, and good luck.
If you could go back in time and give your 20-year-old self 2 pieces of advice, what would those things be?
If I could go back to my 20-year-old self, I would say trust the process. Number one, trust that everything is going to be okay. Stop worrying about things that haven't happened. Stay in the present moment and execute, but trust the process. And the second thing I would say is be kind to yourself. You're not going to get there overnight, but if you don't give up, you will absolutely get there. Trust.
How do you get over the fear of failure that is stopping you from starting a business?
How do I get over the fear of failure that's stopping me from starting a business? Well, for me, the way I look at that question is, why would I value not failing more than succeeding? Now, this is a very normal human condition. In fact, I would say that there's a lot of survival protocols built on this, but I would rather fail at something that would one day succeed than to succeed at something that is going to one day fail. And so all you have to do is go hang out with people that are in their 40s, their 50s, their 60s, their 70s, and listen to the woulda, shoulda, coulda. It should probably gross you out and make you like, ugh. But listen to the people that let their fear of failure stop them from succeeding. Interestingly, as we get older and as people move towards the end of their life, one of the most consistent things that show up is how often people regret the things they didn't do and not the things they did. Failure is not permanent, quitting is. And quitting before you even start, to me, is one of the worst things you could do to yourself. Get out there and know that you absolutely are going to fail your way to success. Nobody gets there without making a ton of mistakes. So get over yourself, or you could say, hey, I fear value more than succeeding, and get into later life and regret not doing a lot of things. It's your choice. But remember, we always do what we value most.
What is the greatest lesson you learned in your 20s?
The greatest lesson I learned in my 20s was a great question. There was a lot. I had a lot of operating assumptions that I had to challenge that caused me a lot of pain, but became some of my greatest lessons. The first operating assumption is I assumed that everyone wanted to grow. And so I showed up in the world and around people assuming that everyone wanted to grow. And I was confused by behavior that seemed like they didn't want to grow because I assumed everyone wanted to grow. And so I tried to explain that in terms that made life more complicated. Once I began to realize that, not everybody wants to grow, and it's a faulty decision to assume they do, life got a lot easier for me. Number two, and kind of part A or part B of the same assumption, is I assumed that everybody wanted truth or was seeking truth. It did not take me very long into my 20s to realize that is simply not true. Truth can be terribly inconvenient to somebody's worldview or how they're showing up, and they may wholesalely reject it or do everything in their power to not acknowledge it. So once I recognized that, then I didn't need to judge and I could just surrender it. And before that, I operated under the belief that everybody wanted truth, and that caused me a lot of pain. And then the last one had a lot to do with closing the identity gap between who we actually are and who we think we are. And so when we start to move into our 20s, we generally have a lot of untested values and we have a lot of untested theories about life. I would strongly suggest you accelerate the testing of your values and the testing of the theories you have about life so that you move out of the theoretical and into the experiential, and you get clear about what your actual values are. That generally comes through a lot of pain as we begin to test our theories about the world and how the world works, and we begin to test our values. And our values show up in our decisions, not so much in what we believe about ourselves. So pay attention to the things that you repeatedly do, pay attention to the things that you repeatedly say, and will give you an inclination of where your values actually lie, and then you can decide whether or not you want to continue to show up that way. The reason I say it that way is if you don't have a value for growth and for truth, it is easy to lie to yourself and convince yourself that you are somebody that you're not because you don't want to look in the mirror. And then when your worldview doesn't make sense, instead of looking at the truth of the actual data, you will just create a more complicated justification for the way that you're showing up. In your 20s, you may get away with that, but in your 30s and 40s, when you're unhappy, unfulfilled, have mental health issues, wondering why your world doesn't make sense, you may want to go look back at the things you did and the things you believed to find out how you got there. Hopefully that helps.
Your number one piece of advice, just blanket statement, what you would tell anyone.
Number one business advice, get advice from people who are where you want to be and get savage about your implementation and execution. I would rather you read a great book 10 times than 10 different books. For a lot of us, we're consuming lots of information without implementation, and that is ultimately a waste of time. So get crazy about your implementation and execution and get advice from people who are where you want to be.